Fastamai. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Agenda. I'm Alex Watton. How vocational training is changing the landscape of employment across the Isle of Man. I speak to Principal of the University College Isle of Man, Jo Pretty, and Member of the Department of Education, Sport and Culture, Laurie Hooper. And how to save money at Ronaldsway Airport. A report shows an estimated £3.7 million trading deficit. All broken down in an extended interview with the Treasury Minister. Is vocational training changing the landscape of work in the Isle of Man? I asked the question after we've recently had the results of vocational courses at University College Isle of Man. It's the first time such results have been published on a specific day on an equal footing to results days for the more traditional school qualifications. So what makes these courses different and what impact are they having on employment? I spoke to UCM Principal Jo Pretty.
We're always looking at the courses we offer, and that's an ongoing thing. You know, it's important that in the curriculum we don't stay the same because employment sectors don't stay the same. So we're always looking at what courses we do and how we meet the needs of the industry. So we're here to support the Isle of Man economy, to get our young people into jobs or rewarding careers. Some of them will progress to higher education, some of them will go straight into the workplace. But we look at developing programmes. So, for example, we've got a very large IT sector on the island, so we've got to make sure that our qualifications are up to date and we're teaching the right coding and all the things that the sector needs. So we constantly do that, but we also look at new programmes, sort of entrepreneurship and various other new routes that we could offer.
And of course we have notoriously low unemployment rates on the Isle of Man. How much do the areas where we are still seeing a lot of vacancies like media and the healthcare system, do you look at those gaps in the market to work out what courses you'll train?
Yeah, we do, and it's a very difficult thing because some of our students come in full-time, but we try and do the timetabling, if you like, to support the industry. So, for example, in catering, we do the timetabling on a Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, which frees up the students to work for the sector at the long weekends. So we try and be flexible as well, because otherwise we wouldn't have enough people filling the jobs. In terms of the healthcare sector, we have a range of programmes and we do all the pre-reg nursing for adult nursing and mental health nursing, and the numbers are very healthy for those programmes and the students get a bursary to help them on their course. But we also do other training programmes for the health and care sector, and that's a constant review of what we're looking at. We're looking at new programmes, for example, cognitive behavioural therapy, so CBT training for the future as well. So lots of areas.
You also mentioned, obviously, a percentage of people leaving here will be going on to higher education, and that means the UK. There is, of course, another ongoing concern across the Isle of Man populace that people are leaving and not coming back. How much do you try to keep people on the island?
That's always a difficult question, and I think if you asked any politician that one, they would struggle to kind of come up with a definitive answer on what people would like to see in this space. We do have students go off. We have a lot of students who progress internally to us. So at the moment, I think there was 352 higher education full-time students with us last year, and that's quite a healthy number, plus all the part-time routes on top of that. And a lot of them are students who would have progressed through the levels to go on to the higher education. But we also offer courses where they can come back and do postgraduate qualifications with us. So somebody might have gone across to the UK, then relocated back to the island, and they can continue at the level 7 postgrad route.
To see what other courses and areas you might look into, how is that changing? Is it changing that regularly?
Well, it's an interesting question because we had a conference yesterday on the future of work and the future of knowing. And it's something we've been building on over the last year. And if you look at the internet over the last 20 years, how that's radically changed everybody's lives, it's important that UCM keeps up to date with the changes, and we know that they are going to be coming at quite a fast pace. So one of the things that we need to look forward to more in the future is what is learning? What are we teaching people for? Is it that they're going to be curious individuals that adapt and that are flexible and, teach all of those difficult things to teach, actually? Is it that we're going to be teaching that, or is it that we're going to be using mobile technology in a very different way to use for learning? So I think we are constantly having to change and adapt and keep up with that pace. So the more we have conferences, the more of our own staff develop themselves as individuals, I think the stronger we'll be. One of the strengths at UCM is actually our staff, in that we recruit people who have worked in the jobs invariably that they're teaching for. So it's very important to us that they've actually worked in a particular industry and they've had a lot of experience and they've been there and they understand how it all comes together, if you like, because those skills can be passed on to the students as well.
The difficulty in having the ability to predict what's going to throw up in terms of technology and things like that, of course, must be invariably very difficult. But when you think of things that are perhaps unique to the Isle of Man, can they give you an edge in some respect? There are, the recent biosphere status that the Isle of Man holds, and the increasing awareness and the urgency around climate change. And do you sort of venture out into them to gauge what's going on there?
Okay, yes, we do. We have good relationships with the employers, and we're on various boards and different bodies, and we meet employers regularly. And I think the key thing is for employers to be able to talk to us and to say, look, this is what we need coming up for our sector. What training, what skills development can we do for this? Or we've got a gap. We talk about the skills gap all the time. In any country, and it's an ongoing topic of conversation, and there's three aspects you can break that down into. So you've got a skills shortage, which is not enough people to do the jobs. You've got the skills match, which is, if you look at the level of qualification an individual has to the job they're doing, there could be a mismatch. And then you've got the deficit, if you like. So actually the match is where they might be trained for a different sector to the one they're working in, and then the deficit is when they've got one level of qualification but the job asks for a different one. So you've got several different aspects to this skills issue that's constantly talked about, and I think it really is just by keeping your ear to the ground, working closely with people and supporting them. So if a sector needs development for skills, they'll hopefully come and see us and we will put on what we can. If we don't have staff, then we look to get staff with those skills, because that's a constant thing as well. You have to have the right skill set in your own teams to be able to deliver something that's up to date.
I'm Laurie Hooper, a member of the House of Keys for Ramsey and a member of the Department for Education.
When it comes to vocational training, is it something you monitor or keep an eye on at the college? Because, as she says there, it's ever changing.
It is broader than just the college, actually, vocational education. It is one of the department's key themes at the moment, is to try and make sure that pupils and students have a choice about where they're going, so not trying to force people down any particular route, and make sure that what we're kind of producing and what the offer is making sure that that is aligned with what industry really needs. So when people are going out there saying, well, what do I want to do with my life, how do I want to get a career or progress in my existing career, what's the right way of doing that, what's the best way of doing that, and how can the education system support me in making that choice?
We mentioned how broad it is there. Is it growing? Are we seeing more and more of that kind of training, and is it more useful?
I think we're definitely seeing it grow. I think we're seeing a wider acceptance now of things that are vocational. I mean, traditionally, you'd look at, and especially when I was in school, it was, well, you go to school, you get your A-levels, you go to university, then you get a job. Whereas these days, that's definitely not the case for everyone, and I don't think it ever has really been the case for everyone. I mean, if you look at me, I went to school, did my A-levels, went to university, did a degree, did another degree, then I went off and came back and did a professional qualification and got work that way. And whereas I was working in the same industry with people doing the same qualification who hadn't taken that route, they'd gone straight from school straight into that training program and that level of work, and so you can actually get to where you want to go without necessarily having to go through all this academic education necessarily. So there are multiple routes, I think, to getting into the career path people want, and like I said, it's about giving people the choice and all the information so they know actually what's the right path for them as an individual.
I guess from what you're saying, there have always been alternatives in place, but it's the traditional element, it's the mindset change. Is it something that you're actively encouraging people to do, to broaden that mindset or be aware perhaps of other options?
I think so. I think it is. I think the department is trying to develop a lifelong learning approach so that when people are going for work, going for jobs, trying to get a new career, for example, or trying to progress in their career, that they have the ability to access the training that they need to do that. So whether that's completely retraining into something new, or whether it's upskilling to get a promotion or the job that they want. So I think there is definitely an acceptance these days that that education is there for more than simply education's sake, that actually it should be about helping people find the right pathway into work. And so I think Joe mentioned that UCM sit on a number of boards and they work quite closely with employers, and you'll probably be aware that Joe sits on the business agency board within the Department for Enterprise, and so there is a very close working relationship there between enterprise and education, trying to build on that. Well, what does industry need? What skills are going to get people into work, and how do we make sure that those skills are available to them, that training is available to people?
Is there a danger that the relationship is too close, that we'll be pushing people into careers that work for the Isle of Man, but not necessarily the individual?
I think that terminology isn't really appropriate, because we don't pushing people in any particular direction. It's about trying to make sure that all the options are there for people, and they have all the information to make the right choice, and so people aren't feeling pressured into going down a particular route if that isn't the right route for them. But it is important to remember that when we are providing training courses and educational opportunities for people, there's not much point in providing somebody with educational opportunities if they're not going to be able to then use those skills and that knowledge in the workplace. So there is a balance to be found, I think. I think we're getting better at that, about working closely between education and enterprise. But it really isn't about pushing people down any particular career path. It's about making sure that they're aware of what opportunities exist and the best way for them to access those opportunities.
And you said you're working very closely with enterprise. How regular are those conversations, especially when Joe Pretty talks about the ever-developing nature of education, especially vocational courses?
Well, they're pretty much constant. They're ongoing, because some of the conversations are quite formal at sort of board meetings, board level. A lot of them are more informal conversations directly between education, sort of with Joe or the college, and individual employers. I mean, I myself sit in both enterprise and education as political member, and so for me it's almost a daily part of the job, making sure that the two departments are aligned in some way.
Well, going on to your slightly enterprise hat then, what areas do you think of enterprise or elsewhere that are the most in need of courses like these, vocational courses?
I think this again comes back down to, what do you treat as a vocational course? So myself, I'm an accountant. I trained as an accountant whilst working under a training contract with a local firm. Now, is that a vocational course or is that an academic qualification? Well, it crosses the line. It's a bit of both. I think traditionally people have tended to think of vocational courses as the more hands-on trades. Sort of construction is really big on vocational training. But these days, actually, we're seeing that it's being accepted more and more in other spheres as well. And so for me, a vocational course would be one that you can study whilst working, essentially. So you're working and you're learning at the same time. So really, in that context, pretty much across the piece in industry, this kind of approach can work in any employment sector, where there are jobs and where there are specific skills that those jobs need.
You're listening to Agenda on Manx Radio. The current trading deficit at Ronaldsway Airport is an estimated £3.7 million. That's the best guess from consultants York Aviation, which says there's a lack of transparency when attempting to get accurate financial information. I asked Treasury Minister Alfred Cannon in an extended interview about the cited lack of transparency with financial information.
Well, their best estimate was £3.7 million, and they were critical, I think, of the way the financial transparency was working, the process was working, and the fact that, to some extent, it was incorporated within the Department of Infrastructure's overall accounts, and they didn't get clear line of sight on some of the cost centres that were functioning within the airport. So I think based on that, based on other evidence that the consultants brought to light in terms of the overall performance of the airport, there was a clear case for change. Many of us have felt for a long time that some of these functions, where there is a more commercial element to government's service, should be structured in a different way. And the ultimate recommendation is that we pursue this idea of an arm's length organisation. And I must be absolutely crystal clear, this is not in any way privatisation. The airport is a strategic asset for government, and this is not about privatisation. This is about managing and running the airport, we think, in a more transparent and accountable manner, so that we get much more oversight in terms of performance levels and the targets and the indicators, the key performance indicators that people are working to.
If we break down a little bit about the reasons behind that, then, I mean, one of the first things to sort of come up from this is that a lot of the information is centralised. So between the airport and harbours, it's a little bit unclear. Is there already work going on to decentralise it or make sure the information is more clearly separated?
So, I mean, we're always looking to improve the financial reporting process that's in place, and not only is Treasury itself working on that, we have our own internal audit team, and of course all our accounts are externally audited as well for accuracy. So there's always areas where improvements can be made. Yes, we're always looking at taking out and identifying areas where we can get more oversight and understanding of where government is spending its money. And of course, in this particular case, I think there is a clear evidence that moving to a more or a different structure around the airport will enable us to get much more oversight, transparency, but I think also improve the service levels that people experience down the airport, and also give executive management more flexibility to make improvements and to perhaps drive a better performance levels across the whole all the aspects of the airport's delivery mechanisms.
We touch on the services there. Of course, what has been heavily criticised for overspending really is people's wages. It's overtime especially, but it also poses the highest political risk. Is that something you would consider looking at to changing people's salaries, whether that's restructuring contracts?
Well, we're going to approach this in a logical and methodical way. First point that needs to be considered is to put together a transition team, and that will comprise many of the interested parties, including Treasury, including the Department of Infrastructure. We'll put together the framework under which the airport would operate. We'll put together the governance structure around that. We need to take that back to Tynwald, but clearly as part of that we need to understand how the staff, what transition would be needed for staff, and also how they would be looked after in the future. I'm very much in favour of supporting, a fair wage for people's performance levels, a fair wage.
Do you think it's fair at the moment, or is it too high?
Well, for the efforts that they put in. I'm not close enough to the airport to make that kind of decision. But what I would say is that I think for staff and for management, this new structure actually would give them much more freedom and flexibility to be part of delivering a much better service at the airport. And I think they should look forward to this change rather than look at it as a negative.
We hear the first thing to happen in these cases is put in place, as you say, that transition team. That transition process, albeit it hasn't started yet, how long, what's the timeline for that?
Well, we would like to be back by April 2020 to Tynwald with our plans, deliver those plans to Tynwald for approval, and then get on and put it into practice. So, we do have a clear set of timescales in front of us, and during that period we'll work hard to make sure that we have covered as much detail as possible in terms of, as I said, the framework and the governance structure that will be needed for a new executive team, or the executive team, to be able to deliver on our expectations.
And where are we regarding legal aid and replacing it with a public defender unit?
Well, that's with the Attorney General at the moment. We've taken what started off as a identification of the possibility of introducing a public defender unit, and bring with it some additional cost savings and better control over the legal aid expenditure. But that has moved not just from criminal legal aid now out into civil legal aid as well. So there's quite a big review going on with the Attorney General. That sits with the Attorney General. It's not being managed by Treasury. And we expect that we'll hear back from the Attorney General in the next parliamentary year as to his findings and what his recommendations are in terms of improving the process around legal aid.
Moving on then to the refinancing of the steam packet, and can you explain a little bit about the 5 options that we're realistically being presented with at the moment?
Yeah, so realistically, we have done a lot of work in terms of exploring as many options as we can around how we manage the finances of the steam packet going forward, and particularly the £76 million a loan effectively, which the government has taken on board as part of the purchase deal. So, we have 5 realistic options in front of us. Either the Isle of Man Treasury continues as at present, effectively lends the money to the steam packet and the steam packet repays it. There's a public bond is looked at, a retail bond was looked at, what we call private placement, i.e. a private financing arrangement, or simply going out to the banks. And those arrangements are all detailed in the document. And alongside the cost of those arrangements, the interest cost, particularly over the 10-year period, the cheapest options for the steam packet would be, based on those options, is either just to retain the loan at the moment with the Isle of Man Treasury, or look for some form of private financing arrangement. What we've done is we've laid the report before Tynwald in order to give Tynwald a consideration of the options. We look forward to hearing views on that in July's debate, and we will return with our recommendation in October once everybody's had a good chance to digest the information that we've provided them.
What option do you favour?
Look, I think we purchased the company to secure a strategic lifeline for the people of the island. In doing so, one doesn't want to then burden that company with significant debt over and above what it's already managing. We want to keep it as streamlined as possible. Therefore, it would be logical to go for the cheapest option. That would give the company the best chance of ensuring that the services they were delivering met public expectations in terms of cost levels. So each of these options carries some form of impact, particularly if you impose higher costs on the business. We want to try and keep those costs as low as possible. It's in our interest, it's in the island's interest to do so. So it would make sense to go for the lowest option in terms of the lowest cost impact, which in terms of the interest spread over a 10-year period. So that's what I would personally be favouring. And we'll look closely at that now once we've heard Tynwald's view in July, and then we'll come back with our recommendation in October.
And finally on agenda, the man charged with leading the island's climate transformation team says his job may be made easier because we're surrounded by the sea. Professor James Curran is the new chair of the Climate Change Emergency Committee. John Moss asked him what information he's taken from the island so far.
At this stage, I'm really questioning and learning and listening. Much of it technical background, obviously, but also gauging the degrees of enthusiasm and commitment, and where there will be difficulties, where there might be obstacles to progress. And all I can say is at this stage, I am very optimistic about the ability and the degree of commitment and enthusiasm I've met so far. I'm very optimistic that the island can achieve what it wishes to in terms of climate change mitigation, and I'll be doing everything I can to support that.
But generally, to make a real difference, you're going to have to drag the island's population kicking and screaming out of what is a comfort zone as far as heating is concerned. You're going to have to take some difficult decisions.
I certainly wouldn't use those terms. I think as people begin to realise the seriousness of climate change, and as I said earlier, I think that's very much becoming commonplace. People understand the emergency of climate change. That immediately imparts a degree of commitment and enthusiasm to address it. And I think as people begin to realise the sequence of actions that can be taken, whereby actually at the end of the process we will all have better, healthier lives, we will have a stronger economy, there will be more jobs, more opportunities, I think people will be persuaded.
Do you think so? Are they prepared to sacrifice what they have at the moment in return for that?
You're using another loaded term there in terms of sacrifice. I simply don't see it in terms of sacrifice. This is about moving to a new and better future in every dimension, and that message will come across very strongly.
The island, of course, is an island, and is it easier for you to do change here rather than, say, in a place across where all sorts of influences can come in from outside?
I think there's a degree of truth in that. The island has enormous potential resources available to it. It also has its own government who can pull levers and make things happen. And I think there's also the opportunity here for developing, in contrast to what you were saying, a sense of community and a sense of determination across the population that the Isle of Man can do it, will do it, and will actually demonstrate to others how to do it successfully.
This might sound a bit bland, but do you have a message for those listening as you start your work to help you in your work?
Yeah, my message would be that this is very early in the day, but we're hoping to have various events for various stakeholders, but also public events, so that people can come along and inform the way that the team and myself personally are going to be thinking about the action plan that the island needs. And I would encourage everyone to obviously become increasingly aware of climate change, if they're not already, and most people are, but also to think what they would like to see in this better future that I am convinced climate change will actually drive us towards. As a necessity, we can create a better future out of it. And I would love people to think about that, come along to whatever events they can, and tell us their ideas.
You use the word drive there. What, use cars less for driving?
Active travel is good for everybody's health. If we can actually all get out and cycle and walk more, so much the better. There's no doubt whatsoever that fossil fuels need to be phased out, so cars that we have will need to change in the future. But people can choose. People can choose whatever they want to do as long as it's not emitting carbon.
That's all from the programme. Tune in again for Agenda at the same time next week, and you can listen again to this episode as a podcast on manxradio.com. For now, though, have a very good evening.